It's interesting. It's an engine that about the size of a school bus. And this engine is pretty much a much larger version of the thing I built. It's also an electric magnetic fusion containment engine, but it is sophisticated and it is powerful. I would have to compare mine to it. Would be like I had a Model A and this thing was a Ferrari. I mean, it's just tremendous, powerful difference, but we both were of the same engine breed. And this one had been damaged right in the center of the core. In the type of configurations we build, we have dual particle accelerators that cause the fusion reaction. Right in that center of these accelerators is an area that I call the eye of the hurricane. And it's like an infinity pattern, figure 8, and right in the center, it's quiet there on a matter of conversion area. So then this particular engine was a hole there about 4 feet in diameter. That was the first thing I noticed. They asked me to look at it and describe to them how I thought the thing functioned. And I asked them, how come I'm telling you about your engine? And they said that the engine was recovered in a project they was working with, and they wasn't sure how everything functioned on it, and personnel that were available to work on that was not available anymore. And they said if I could just help them out a little bit. Well, being 17 years old at the time, they thought I didn't pick up on too many adult innuendos, but I guess I was born old. I knew exactly what they were doing. So I said, fine, yeah, I'll be glad to help my country, So we play along, and I asked them, can I walk up to it? They said, sure. As a matter of fact, you can climb on it if you want. So I got up to the engine, and then something really unusual about the engine, other than the design, the alloys itself, just the sheen and color, looked like iridescent color, like when you hold a CD disc to the sun and you see the rainbow. Imagine those kind of colors covering this entire engine, and glowing like that. It's really pretty. The color of the engine was unlike any metal or alloy I was ever familiar with. And when I walked to the engine, there was a shadow on the engine. Now, I just told you that the rooms were built where you couldn't have shadows. When I stuck my arm out to it, there was a shadow on the engine, but right on the table, there was no shadow. So it's not a light casting the shadow on the engine. The engine is picking up radiation off my body. So I back away from it, the shadow dissipates. When I bulk back up, it's back on. And so when I put my hands on the engine to pull myself up on it, that's where it's interesting, because the alloys in some places were so thin, it was translucent. You could see through it like a sheet of amber. So when I laid my hands on it, this really interesting swirl pattern would come off wherever my skin was touching, and they would swirl out through the metal, going out through the alloy. And I didn't know of any metal that could do that. So I thought, wow, this thing is heat sensitive. It's picking up my body heat waves like that. So when I crawled, and they were really neat-looking, smooth type wave flows coming off my hands. So I pulled myself up on the engine and started walking over it, and it was huge. It was radically different than mine because it was just so much of a different design. And the way they ran the fusion flows and the way you would run fuel in a fuel line of an engine, this thing was totally different. There was no wiring. Now, my engine was covered with miles of wiring, so I could get all the firing orders right for the cyclotrons, the particle accelerators.
Did you immediately know that it was alien at that time?
I suspected when I put my hands on it, it felt so different. It felt like a frog belly. If you ever, I don't know if people play with frog bellies, but I did. It looked wet, but it wasn't wet. It's just so slick looking, but it wasn't slick. And it was just amazing. But it also had such a texture, and as soon as you touched it, it was cold in the air-conditioned well in the facility, but the minute you touched the metal, it became your temperature instantly. I don't know of any alloys that can do that. So I started going, oh, this may not be from around here. So I'm walking down the engine, and I go up to where the main core cells are and the particle accelerators. There's a hole blown out there, and I step down into it just to get a better look. Now, at this point of view, I'm down in the hole in the engine, and the walls are real smooth. They're so smooth, the blast, these temperatures like that engine of mine, they run at 100 million degrees centigrade. You work with plasma physics. So when the field dropped down, this engine's metals were exposed to that kind of temperature, vaporized. But as soon as it vaporized at that particular point, fail-safe, it shut the engine off. All this probably occurred in a nanosecond, a billionth of a second. So the blast only irradiated out to about 4 feet in diameter and stopped. What was interesting is the way the engine's metal was whenever there's torn places. You could rub your hands over the torn areas that are jagged, but they wouldn't cut you because they're so smooth. It's more like flesh being torn rather than metal. Well, when I come up, stood back up on top of the engine, I knew, looking at some of the interior parts of it and the way it was constructed, I had enough of what was going on. So I turned around and told them about this firing system here. And they were going, yeah, where is the firing system? And I started to tell them that because I finally figured out what this thing was doing. But then I said, well, why am I telling you about your own firing system if all this is yours and you got, this isn't from here, is it? Matter of fact, it ain't from around the area, is it, boys? And they started getting upset. I said, let's do some assumptions. This is an engine. I'm assuming it came out of a craft, a big one, by the size proportional differences, probably 300 feet plus, you know, the length of a football field. Well, therefore, it's got occupants. What in God's name have you done with them? Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because they are up on the engine coming after me, and it's time to leave. Well, when I bend down to get off the engine, I put my hands back on the engine. Something interesting. Instead of the nice smooth wave lines, they would now look like small tornadoes coming off all my fingertips, moving through the metal. And I pulled my hands back, put them back on. There they were, but they were starting to calm down a little bit. And then I realized what this thing was. They grabbed hold of me, the Air Force guys did. We got back in the golf cart and we were riding back up to the surface. And I was sitting there thinking, I just realized what this engine is. It's a symbiotic engine. The engine is alive. It is an engine that's capable. The reason they couldn't figure out the firing order is that the tubing that was cascading all over its body looked like the same pattern you would have from a brainstem of a neurosynaptic ordering firing order. So what's happening is when the pilots sit down in their seats, their thought waves drive the engine. When I first touched the engine, I was curious and awed by it. The wavelengths were smooth off my fingers. When I was getting off down from it, I was totally angry. The engine was not picking up radiation heat waves. It was picking up mental thought energy. That engine is capable of a symbiotic relationship with the pilots.
Did you tell them that?
I didn't tell them squat. That's why they couldn't figure out the firing order. They said there was no wiring or circuitry. No, the pilots' brains are the wiring and the circuitry. The engine needs them in order to do all of its functions. In return, the pilots know exactly what the engine feels and how the spacecraft feels. The entire craft is probably symbiotic. Now, before you sit there and blow this off like it's just a bunch of science fiction, let me bring you up to date here to current events. I just left Princeton University. There's a Dr. John up there, Robert John, and he runs the Pear Research Institute. They have a contract from McDonnell Douglas, ever heard of them? Small aerospace company, to build mental shielding for firing systems on the new F-22 fighters. So people go, what's that got to do with anything? Pilot comes home at night, catches his wife in bed with another man. He's having a bad day. He's now got to go fight a fighter that is so sensitive. When he straps on his helmet, just like the Apache helicopter, you turn your head this way, the gun mounts follow your head. This firing system now links to your brain. Foxfire, Clint Eastwood. Where do you think the Hollywood's getting their ideas? McDonnell Douglas is under construction building a symbiotic relationship firing control system. Where did they get their idea? I wonder. Could have been back in June 1971, and God knows how long they've had this engine. However, it's reality. We have symbiotic engines in aeronautics. We're moving into that area right now with the F-22 and beyond.